Okay.
All right. So here is our core set of reviewers. I'm going to start by introducing Sue Maxwell. She is your point of contact when you are submitting a new application. Sue is also responsible for receiving all of the applications that you all submit through the core's FDOT email address, DoD Safe links, and the regulatory request system. Just as a reminder, after your project has been assigned to a project manager, you no longer have to email Sue or Lisa to request additional DoD safe links or send them any additional information. That needs to go directly to your reviewers. So to start, let's go over our reviewers. We have Lucy Brandenburg, who reports to your Palm Beach office, and she reviews all of the nationwide general permits for the entire state of Florida. We also have in our team Heather Mason, who sits in the Jacksonville office, and she reviews all the permit types for District 1, 4, 6, and Turnpike. And then there is me, Veronica Beach, in the Panama City office, and I review all permit types for districts 2, 3, 5, and 7. Heather and I are geographically located and assigned, but depending on workloads, you may see us change districts or help out. We tend to help out if the need comes. Lisa, next.
Mm.
All right. As Lisa mentioned, the main objectives of this presentation are to get all of the FDOT, Turnpike, and agents that are involved in any kind of permitting to a point where we can reduce the number of requests for additional information. In order to accomplish these, we are going to talk about the regulatory request system, how to successfully submit applications. We're going to touch on regulatory jurisdiction, application packages, drawings, consultations. Also, we are going to discuss no permit required letters, go over the most common nationwide and general permits used by FDOT, look at the Section 401 process and who we coordinate with that for that, NEPA documentation, and some other tools that you can add to your toolbox. We are also going to talk about the common mistakes that we see in application packages, and we are going to give you a list of links for future usage. Next. The regulatory request system, also known as the RRS, is the new web-based platform that the Corps has put together. It's available to the public, and it is used to develop a more up-to-date and real-life, real-time experience. So it lets the applicants go into a website, submit the application directly into that website, and then the applicant can see real time little pieces of the status of their project. I have included the link in here to make it easier for you to find that if you're not familiar with it. In order for an agent, FDOT, or Turnpike to submit an application, they will have to go to this link and create an account. After you're logged in, the system is going to prompt you to answer project-specific questions, similar to what you would answer in your application forms and your PJD forms. When you enter all of that information in, then you get to the end of the process, which lets you, let me see. Oops, sorry. I thought is my camera on? Yes, sorry. And at the end of the process, you are allowed to submit all of your files and your documents, all of your supporting documentation. So this side will let you manually enter information, but it will also let you enter upload files. The RRS system right now is not available for you to enter a response request for additional information. I know I have seen that question a couple times. When your RRS system is not available, you can still use the old email address And just as a reminder, if your new application package is over 20 megabytes, we ask that you send Sue Maxwell an email so that she can send you a DoD safe link. You do not have to copy the rest of the project managers when you are requesting these DoD safe links for new applications only. Next. Let's talk about successful submittals either via RRS, emails, or DoD safe. We ask that you upload your documents separately instead of one combined large PDF file. The team spends a lot of hours trying to download these files, splitting them, and then merging some of the documents. Also, all of our internal file management require us to archive these documents separately. We ask that you use recognizable names, for example, NIMS concurrence or CRAS, instead of the FPID numbers and FDOT internal codes only. And please, we also ask that you use short names. Sometimes we are not able to download files and save them into our folders because the names are extremely long. If your project has any historical federal or state 404 permit application numbers or any FDOT, FPNs, or ETDM numbers, we would like for you to reference those in your application packages. It helps us keep everything together. Also, please maintain consistent project names. This is very important, especially if your project is going to come back for a modification or a future time extension or re-verifications. We need the project name to be as close as possible to that original project. If you can do that, that will be great. We have these in a couple of our slides, and I'll repeat it again. If you are submitting responses to additional informations, those have to go directly to the project managers. Even if you need a DoD safe link, send that email to your project manager and not to Sue Maxwell, because it does causes some confusions and double applications in our ends. Next. All right, regulatory jurisdiction. So the Corps operates under two separate laws. The Clean Water Act, which has Section 404, which requires a permit for the discharge of dredge or fill material. And then the Rivers and Harbors Act, which it's under Section 10, requires that any work in, over, or under navigable waters of the US needs a permit. We will get to the questions at the end of the presentation, just so that we can move through it a little bit faster. I'm seeing them coming in the chat. Sorry about that. In addition to Section 10 of the Rivers and Harbors Act, we also have responsibilities under Section 14 of the Rivers and Harbors Act, and that is most commonly known as the Section 408. That process is done by the engineering divisions and offices, but we are responsible for initiating those reviews. This is needed if your project is in federal navigational channels or any Corps of Engineers real estate areas. Next. So some of you might be familiar with this diagram. It shows the landward limits of the Section 404 and the Section 10 jurisdictions. A lot of our permits would have, you're getting two permits, a 404 permit and a Section 10 permit. Some of them just get 404. What it's important to note in here is that for tidal waters, your Section 404 jurisdiction goes up to the high tide line. And for fresh waters, your Section 404 jurisdiction goes up to the wetland. For Section 10, the landwards limits are the mean high water for tidal waters and the ordinary high water lines for fresh waters. Next. So with the recent discussions regarding jurisdiction, we thought it would be helpful to quickly mention the types of waters regulated by the Corps. And we also want to remind everyone that we are currently under the pre-2015 regulatory regime consistent with the SACIT 2023 decision. The waters that the Corps regulate are traditional navigable waters, which includes all of your waters that are currently used or were used or may be used for interstate or foreign commerce. This also includes all of the waters that are subject to the ebb and flow, basically your tidal waters. Interstate waters includes all of your waters that cross the state boundaries. Other waters includes your intrastate lakes, rivers, streams, and others. Impoundments are the impounded waters that would have otherwise been identified as waters of the United States if that impoundment was not there. This happened a lot in systems where there's dams. Tributaries. Tributaries include any natural, man-altered, or man-made water body that flows directly or indirectly to a traditional navigable waters. Tributaries can include rivers, streams, creeks, canals, and some of the ditches. And then territorial seas is self-explanatory. So we will move to adjacent wetlands. Adjacent wetlands are those that are adjacent to a traditional navigable water, interstate water, territorial sea, tributary, or impoundment. These wetlands have to be have to have a continuous surface connection, which does not necessarily mean a hydrological connection 365 days out of the year. So continuous, but not hydraulically connected. The most important thing on this slide is to remember that other surface waters is that yellow square in there is not a definition that the Corps recognizes for waters of the US. And we want you to remember that when you are putting together drawings and documentations that you're submitting to the Corps. Other surface water does not really have a meaning to us. We also ask that you instead use non-wetland waters. Name the actual waterway. If you're working in the Gulf of Mexico, you are fine to put in there Gulf of Mexico instead of other surface waters. We have received applications with named water bodies being called other surface waters. Next. Content of an application package. If you are in need of a comprehensive list that you can follow when you're trying to put together your next package and all of your supporting documentation, these next couple of slides is probably going to help you the most. But today I'm only going to cover a couple of the items, and it's the ones that are most often missed. Knowing the funding type is extremely important to us. It helps us plan for timelines, and it helps us determine what kind of coordinations are needed. We also often receive application forms with only one signature. If there's an agent and an FDOT district coordinator, we need to have both signatures on those application forms. Any locations that have latitude and longitude, please go ahead and convert them to decimal degrees. Our database would only take decimal degrees, so we ask that you submit those to us in decimal degrees. If your project has temporary impoundments, that might be on the next one, Lisa. It's on the next one, I think. Oh, maybe. If your project has temporary impoundments, dewatering, or return of waters, these all require permits. So please let us know if your project is going to involve any of these activities so that we can include that in your permit and you don't have to come back for a second permit. Avoidance and minimization and mitigation statements are needed for all of the applications. We ask that these avoidance and minimization statements be project specific. For example, if your project was redesigned to avoid or minimize a wetland, and you all decided to widen a road within the median, let us know that. That is something that we can enter into the avoidance and minimization. If you are working only within the right of way to avoid some wetlands, all those are type of avoidance and minimization measures. Turbidity and erosion precautions and changes in methodology. If you're choosing to construct your project in a way that avoids more impacts, that is something that we can put in this section of avoidance and minimization. For wetland delineations, we need to make sure that when you're submitting packages, we're using the Corps of Engineers forms, the 1987 manual, and the Atlantic and Gulf Coastal Plain Regional Supplement, version 2. And that is in our website, and you have links to that on the last slide. Let's see. For compensatory, oops, you skip, that's fine. For compensatory mitigation, please provide data sheets with all your scores. Use the 2008 compensatory mitigation rule and follow the preferred hierarchy. If you have a project that does not follow the hierarchy, we need to have a justification for that. Last but not least, that's on the next one, I think. Yes. Last but not least, there is a definition for what is considered a complete application that can be found in 33 CFR 325.1 D 1 to 10. However, the list of the documents in that regulation is not enough information for your project manager to complete the decision. That's it.
All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Lucy Brandenburg. Can you hear me? Okay.
A little bit. You're a little weak.
Oh, no. How about now? Better?
Great.
Okay, I'm just going to talk a little bit loud then. So sometimes applicants will want verification of the Corps' jurisdiction over aquatic resources or the lack thereof on a site. And they will want a regulatory jurisdictional determination. So we have two different types. We have approved jurisdictional determinations and preliminary jurisdictional determinations, which are tools used by the Corps to help implement Section 404 of the Clean Water Act and Sections 9 and 10 of the Rivers and Harbors Act. Both types of these jurisdictional determinations specify what geographic areas will be treated as subject to these regulations by the Corps under one or both statutes. So PJDs, or preliminary jurisdictional determinations, are written indicators that there may be waters of the U.S. on a parcel or indications of the approximate locations of those waters of the U.S. on a parcel. PJDs are advisory in nature and may not be appealed. They include compliance orders that have an implicit JD, but no approved JD. And unlike an AJD, a PJD does not represent a definitive official determination that there are or are not jurisdictional aquatic resources on a site and don't contain an expiration date. AJDs are a little bit different. AJDs are a Corps document stating the presence or absence of waters of the U.S. on a parcel, or a written statement and map identifying the limits of those waters of the U.S. on a parcel. AJDs are clearly designated appealable actions and will include a basis of JD with the document. AJDs are also valid for 5 years. All right, and then here are the forms for jurisdictional determinations. The form on the left is going to be for all jurisdictional determination requests. This form kind of goes over all of the different types of jurisdictional determinations and kind of goes over the activity that you're proposing. So we're going to want to see this form for all of your JD requests. And then the form on the right is for PJDs only. This is where you're going to put in your background information and all of the information about your resources on the site. And that also includes a little bit information about the applicant and where that project site is. So the table over here on the far right includes some of the differences between PJDs and AJDs. So PJDs may or may not require a site visit and can usually be completed via desktop review. They're a bit more of an expedited process and are always associated with an in-house permit. The required documents for a PJD include the JD request form on the left, the PJD request form on the right, and then all of your supporting documentation. And then the AJD, we're going to want to conduct a field site visit to verify the extent of the resources on site. AJDs are a bit lengthier of a process. They need to be reviewed by Corps' headquarters and the EPA. AJDs are posted on the Corps' website and can be either associated with an in-house permit or be a standalone JD with their own SAJ number and everything. The required documents for a JD include an AJD, include the JD request form, and then all of the supporting documentation. So this slide goes into a little bit more detail on that supporting documentation that we require for PJDs versus AJDs. So for the PJD documentation, we're going to want to see that both of those forms. We're going to want to see the core wetland determination data forms, specifically the Atlantic and Gulf coastal plain region. And then maps. We want to see a location map, project area overlain on historic aerials, USGS topo maps, NRCS hydric soil maps, national wetland inventory maps, etc. An aquatic resource map that labels wetlands, non-wetland waters, and uplands within the project area. Please make sure to include where your information was obtained and the imagery date, because imagery varies year to year, so it's important to know what year that aerial is from. If there are any site photos, those are always helpful. And then also if you could include any permit history for water conveyance structures, because that will kick out jurisdictional aquatic resources. So for AJDs, we're going to want to see that JD request form, the data forms, a lot of the same supporting information, but for AJDs, we're going to want to see a flow lines map, so we're able to see where those aquatic resources are flowing on your project site. And we're also going to want to see a jurisdictional map that labels the features, the aquatic resources as jurisdictional and non-jurisdictional. Please make sure to use the pre-2015 Waters of the U.S. post-SACIT terminology, i.e. traditional navigable water, jurisdictional tributary, non-jurisdictional wetland, etc. Please include site photos, permit history. AJDs, as I mentioned before, require coordination with the EPA and the core JD project development team. So in order to evaluate the aquatic resources on a site, the Corps needs to have accurate and complete documentation. So on those core data forms, we need data points that are taken to reflect current site conditions and represent the vegetative communities on site, the current site conditions especially. We need to have a sufficient number and location of those data points to show wetland and non-wetland statuses of the entire investigation area. Data points should either confirm or refute the potential for aquatic resource present depicted on natural resource mapping. And data points should be located so that there is at least a pair of points for each wetland identified on both sides of the wetland, so you're able to differentiate between wetlands and non-wetlands. And then over here on the right is an image of that data form that we use. So permits require plans that accurately illustrate the work proposed. So we require dredge and fill sketches and contract plans. Make sure that your labeling mean high water, ordinary high water, mean low water, et cetera, on your plan view and cross sections. For all of your maps, please make sure to use the website used in Dative Imagery, as I've said a few times. All of your recent aerials, please make sure that all of the features on site are labeled with proper naming conventions, north arrow, and a legend. It's also really helpful to include a corresponding table that lists your resources on site. And we have a special note here for subaqueous line, pipe, and cable projects. This is everything that we require for all of that. This includes the linear feet of cable, the depth of the cable, installation methodology. A lot of this information is super important if you have a project that needs to go through the Section 408 process, because we're going to be asking a lot of those same questions there on the right for subaqueous cables. So most projects are going to require some sort of consultation, and I've included this table to kind of go over all of the different agencies, requirements, and the differences between state versus federally funded projects. So for U.S. Fish and Wildlife, to fulfill the ESA, FDOT is going to provide, and we verify those FDOT programmatic checklists or the U.S. Fish and Wildlife keys. For federally funded projects. And for federally funded projects, if there is going to be any sort of consultation or concurrence biological opinion, FDOT's going to be initiating that. Versus for state funded projects, you're still going to provide us highlighted programmatic keys and checklists, but then we will be initiating all of the consultations and biological opinions, commitments, etc. For national marine fisheries, to fulfill the ESA requirement for federally funded projects, we have the JAXPO summary sheet and PDC checklist. FDOT would provide that to us all filled out, and we would verify. For consultation, FDOT would initiate consultation requests, concurrence letters, etc. And then for state projects, it's going to be the same thing: JAXPO summary sheet and PDC checklist. You provide, we verify. And then for state funded projects, if there is any sort of consultation needed, the Corps is going to be initiating that. So for national marine fisheries, under the Magnuson-Stevens Fishery Conservation and Management Act for essential fish habitat, please provide a benthic survey that was performed during growing season and all of your supporting information. For federally funded projects, if there are impacts to EFH, please provide EFH habitat conservation recommendations. It could be a letter or an email, or fulfill that consultation. For state funded projects, we require the same information, but the Corps would be initiating that consultation or concurrence. So for SHPO to fulfill NEPA requirements, FDOT, for federally funded projects, FDOT would provide and the Corps would verify the SHPO FDOT programmatic agreement or a SHPO concurrence letter and a CRAS if one was performed. For state funded projects, please provide that CRAS. The SHPO concurrence letter is usually provided by FDOT, but it can be coordinated by the Corps to fulfill that requirement. And then for the Tribal Historic Preservation Office to fill the NEPA requirements, this is going to be the same for both state and federally funded projects. FDOT would provide and the Corps would initiate CRAS and discoveries to address tribal trust responsibilities, government to government, or nation to nation coordination. All right, and I made a special slide just for ESA consultation. So the first order of business should always be to try and evaluate as many species as we can via those programmatic keys. We have the USACE Jacksonville National Marine Fisheries JAXPO for 10 minor in-water activities. We have the core U.S. Fish and Wildlife effect determination programmatic keys. And then there's also that programmatic approach between U.S. Fish and FDOT. If there is going to, so then for consultations, we have informal consultations and formal consultations. The informal consultations are going to be if you get a may affect, not likely to adversely affect determination for a species without a key, or a may affect determination with a key. We would move on to formal consultations or BOs for likely to adversely affect opinions. We have some important notes regarding listed species, especially for the tricolored bat, since that's going to be maybe coming up soon. So 2 points to make. If U.S. Fish and Wildlife concurs with a man law determination or provides protective measures for likely to adversely affect determination for proposed species, we can request conference. A conference opinion for a proposed listed species can be adopted as a BO if a species or a critical habitat is ultimately listed or designated. We have been also provided some new special conditions for a proposed listed species or proposed critical habitat. That first one is going to be for projects within the range of a proposed federally listed species or a proposed critical habitat, and the Corps has not completed a conference with the respective service for that species or critical habitat. So it's really important that you evaluate all species, whether they are proposed listed or listed, because if you do not evaluate a species and it becomes listed while you are performing construction activities, you will need to stop construction and go back and reevaluate that species in order to comply with Section 7 of the ESA. That second special condition, you might also be starting to see, especially on the standard permits, it is going to be for projects within a construction time frame of 5+ years, and work may affect a proposed species. So if work is ongoing for 5 to 10 years, new species could be listed at any time. I also included the IPAC website. Oh, sorry. I also included the IPAC website in the lower left-hand corner. This website is super useful for endangered species. You can put in your little location and it kind of makes an entire list of all of the listed species. It includes even proposed species. It's a live website, so things are always changing. Their range, their critical habitat, it's always being updated. So I would definitely recommend using the IPAC over FNA just because it actually includes everything. All right, I also have been getting lots of questions on NPRs here at the Corps, so I wanted to go over them a little bit. I actually grabbed these options straight from our NPR template here at the Corps. So, and it kind of explains things a little bit easier on exactly what qualifies as an NPR. So work must qualify under one option from each legislative authority. So under Section 10, you have 3 options. When the activity is not in a navigable water of the U.S., not subject to the ebb and flow of the tide. Option B, when the activity is located in navigable water, but the activity is not regulated. And option C, when the activity is located in navigable water, but the work is a bridge. And then under Section 404, we've got option A, when the work may be in waters of the U.S., but the activity does not involve the discharge of dredge or fill material. Option B, which requires an AJD always. It's when the activity is regulated but not located in a water of the U.S., i.e. the discharge of dredged or fill material is proposed in a non-jurisdictional aquatic resource, or the AJD review area is completely dry land. And then option C, when the activity is regulated but work is not taking place within the aquatic resource. So this can be supported by PJD, AJD, or no AJD, or no JD at all. A good example I can think of that we often see with FDOT would be an upland cut ditch that has no, past permit history for stormwater conveyance. For that one, you would go ahead and select option A under the Rivers and Harbors Act because it's not a navigable water of the US. And then under section 404, you would select option B because we do need to go and verify that that ditch is upland cut. And we would go out and verify that via a site visit and past permit history for historics. And then a special note here on the left, applicants are responsible for ensuring compliance with all federal, state, or local permits. This includes your state water quality certification, Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary permits, and compliance with Section 7 of the ESA 106, etc. All right, and now we have general permits. Some common nationwide verification permits we see with FDOT include maintenance, outfall and intake structures, bank stabilization, 14, a lot, linear transportation projects, return water from upland contained disposal areas, categorical exclusions, and aquatic habitat restoration and enhancement and establishment activities. And then over on the right, we've got our GP, SAJ 92, that's extra special for FDOT and Florida's Turnpike Enterprise. This one has limits that are super important to this rule. So dredge and fill impacts are limited to a ½ acre of tidal impacts to waters of the US and 5 acres of non-tidal impacts for any 1 mile segment of roadway length. There is a maximum loss of 50 acres of waters of the US per project. This rule does not authorize a new alignment. I also want to mention that your indirect impacts should be assessed, but they are not included in those acreage totals up there at the top. And then this project must have gone through the FDOT, EDTM, or PD&E study within 5 years of submittal. So before you go ahead and submit for this rule, make sure that this project has at least been reevaluated in the past 5 years. Right, and then here are our application forms. The form on the left, ENG 4345, you can use for all permits. You can use them for general permits, nationwide permits, and standard permits. The form on the right is ENG 6082, and that one is specific for nationwide permit verifications. I've got these little circles here on the corners of the pages. And this is where you're going to be able to see the form number and the expiration date so that you can make sure you're using the most recent form available.
Okay, am I loud and clear?
Yes.
Thanks. We received some requests to go over our Section 401 process, which is a process that's really internal to the Corps of Engineers. Section 401 of the Clean Water Act is the water quality certification rule. This rule ensures that projects requiring a federal permit would not violate state water quality standards. In Florida, water quality certification is included with your state environmental resource permit, or ERP, or you can get a general water quality certification a general water quality certification can be granted by the Florida Department of Environmental Protection for core general permits when they are created or renewed. When the Corps creates a new general permit or renews an existing general permit, such as the nationwide permits and the SAJ 92 every 5 years, we send a request for general water quality certification to FDEP. FDEP can either grant the general water quality certification, which would then cover all of the projects that qualify under that general permit, or they can deny it. When FDEP denies a water quality certification, that means that an individual water quality certification must be received for the project before any core permit can be issued. So projects that require a core standard permit a general permit that was not granted water quality certification, or if water quality certification was waived, such as for state exemption, require an additional review process that we go through here at the Corps. So first, the Corps must receive a copy of the state ERP permit, which contains the water quality certification. Then the Corps sends a 401A2 notice to EPA. We do that by sending them an email that contains a copy of the application form, the project drawings, and a copy of the ERP. EPA then has 30 days to review the project and determine if it might affect the water quality in a neighboring jurisdiction. Neighboring jurisdictions are tribal lands and adjacent states. So for Florida, that's Alabama and Georgia. If no, then EPA sends us an email stating that they will not issue a may affect determination for the project, and then our process is complete. If yes, then EPA facilitates a resolution process, which includes public hearings and discussions amongst the parties. EPA's review typically only takes a few days, but they do have 30 days to review that if needed. Next. Some common Corps general permits used by FDOT that have been granted a general water quality cert and do not need to go through the 401A2 notification process include Nationwide's 3, 7, 13, 14, 16, 23, and 27, and Regional General Permit 92. Now, we do have to get these recertified every 5 years, so there is a chance that that could change in the future, but it's been relatively stable in the past. Nationwide's 3, 23, and 27 do not have a general coastal zone consistency concurrence, which is a whole separate concurrence that is needed from the state. So for those, the Corps will still need a copy of the ERP before issuance so that we can get a copy of that coastal zone consistency concurrence. NEPA. The Corps fills out NEPA documentation for our permits. These are our decision documents, and they can be quite lengthy, and they can take us a lot of time to write. So we know that FDOT also fills out NEPA documentation. So any NEPA information that you can give us that you have already written helps us write faster decision documents, which means we can write faster permits, which I know everyone loves. So please include, oh, sorry. Can we go back? Please include these documents in your application for a standard permit when you have them. They include the state environmental impact reports, an alternative analysis that is specific to the project segment being applied for. Often we will get a PD&E study or an NRE that was written for multiple project segments, and it can take us hours to pull out the information that is specific to the project segment. So if you can include an alternatives analysis specific to that project segment being applied for, it can save us many hours of work and will help us write faster permits. Please also include any contamination information. If during the PD&E study, it was determined that there was a medium or high risk of contamination in some of the areas that will be used for the project, and testing would be needed, such as Phase 2 impacts to contamination assessments, please include those test results and a description of how FDOT will handle any contaminated sediments and those contaminated areas. And also include an explanation of whether the project would affect any private or municipal water supplies. An example of this might be if acquisition of right-of-way is needed and that right-of-way contains a municipal water supply or a private well that needs to be abandoned. Okay, next. In the next few slides, we're going to give you some tools to use while preparing your applications. The UMAM is the Uniform Mitigation Assessment Method. It's one of several rapid assessment methods used to determine the functional loss and gain to resources as a result of a proposed project's impacts and compensatory mitigation. The assessment method that you'll need to use depends on what mitigation is proposed for the project. If a mitigation bank is used, you'll need to use the same assessment method as the bank. So you can find the bank's assessment method on the RIBITS website. That's RIBITS, RIBITS. Most permittee responsible mitigation, with the exception of some older permittee responsible mitigation areas or PRMAs, will use UMAM. If you are using UMAM, the gray table below is a really helpful rule-based score calibration tool that can help increase consistency in scoring between users. It's taken from the old UMAM training manual, which can still be found on FDEP's website, and we will also provide a copy of both of these documents by email after the presentation. Next.
This is me. Yep, this one is mine. Sorry. Looking for my mute button. This is the Corps of Engineers wetland delineation sheet. I wanted to introduce it to those that don't know it and just go over some of the things that are commonly missed. The sampling date, we see a lot of forms that come in without a sampling date. The sub-region, the manual and our regional supplement both have a map that will let you know exactly where in the state of Florida your project location is and what subregion you need to pick. For the state of Florida, the only subregions are T, U, or P. Also, I wanted to point out the significantly disturbed question. We often receive FDOT data sheets that with points taken in the right-of-way or in ditches, and this is left blank. If your project is on a ditch or is within the right-of-way, chances are it's on a disturbed site. Other things to mention in here, if you are selecting indicators like surface waters, make sure you go ahead and also select surface waters in the field observations and give us the depth. We are trying to make the data sheets more consistent. If you're selecting saturation, make sure you give us a saturation in the bottom as well, and you select those depths. A couple of other things to mention is that this data sheet is now online in our website, and it has macros and a lot of drop downs that would help with the completion process. It really helps a lot. So if you don't have the one that has the drop downs, you need to go to our site and go find those. In the soil section, the regional supplement requires the soil pits to be 20 inches. If you are not able to get that depth, then make sure you use those remark boxes and tell us why you're not able to get those depths. But that is the goal, to reach that 20 inches in depth. Let me see. That's it on this one. We can move next. These are additional tools. Section 408 can be initiated by the Corps, regulatory, the U.S. Coast Guard, or the non-federal sponsors. Those are your water management districts. At the bottom in here, I have a list of all of the information that the Corps needs if we are initiating those reviews. If the review is being done by the Coast Guard or the non-federal sponsor, then we are going to need a copy of that 408 authorization and any kind of frac out plans and any other commitments before we can issue a Section 10 or a Section 404 permit. Next. This is just a follow-up on Section 408. If your subaqueous lines or pipes or cables are going on their federal channel, then a little bit more of information is needed, and this is a list of what we will require. The methodology is very important because it will determine the effects of your project and how would they impact the federal project. It's different when you're doing directional drilling versus a site casting activity. Those are big differences. Next.
We put together a list of the 15 most common omissions from our applications that we see. And rather than reading the whole list for you, I'm going to go ahead and highlight just a few things. One of those things is the latitude and longitude in decimal degrees. Also, the alternatives analysis that is specific to the project segment and not for multiple project segments, only to the project segment or segments that are currently being applied for. Adjacent property owners lists in address label format. It really helps us cut down hours of review time if we get those in address label format. So please check with your project manager to find out what type of labels they use and provide the labels in the correct format. The correct wetland assessment methods such as UMAM, RAP, MRAP, or for Little Pine Island Mitigation Bank, they have their own assessment method. So always be sure to check rivets and make sure that any mitigation bank that you're proposing to use, that you submit the wetland assessment method that matches the one that the bank uses. And also core wetland data sheets in pairs, an upland and a wetland sheet for each assessment area. Next. Here is a list of web resources that we've put together. Veronica was just talking about the automated data forms, and if you haven't used them, they're really helpful. They actually fill themselves out in some cases. You check your observations, you put your observations into the form, and then it will populate and calculate. You can find that under, it looks like the fourth bullet here, wetland determination data form. If you go to that website and scroll down, you'll find the data forms for the Gulf Coastal Plain region, and they are in Excel format. So please download those. They can save you lots of time and help with the accuracy of the forms. All right. And now we'll move on to questions.
All right. All right, let me maneuver a little because I was unable to see questions from my view. Veronica, you said that you were able to see those questions?
Yes.
Okay.
The first question is whether or not we were going to provide a recording. And so that you answered, yes, there will be a recording. It was going to be given to FDOT, and they're going to post it on their website.
Yes, and I will always will also convey the UMAM information that Heather just went over. I'll include those two manuals as well.
Other question is whether or not we're going to provide the presentation on a PDF format.
A PDF.
The
We
slides.
could send it out in a PDF. If someone specifically wants a hard copy, they can email me directly and I can send it to you. Let me get that name. Angela?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. I will plan to get that over to you.
Thank you so much.
You're
This
welcome.
is Stephanie Kasoy. I would appreciate a copy of that as well.
What was your last name again, Stephanie?
Kassoy.
Got it.
Could you add Aaron's Druderi to that, please, as well?
Lisa, do you get a list on WebEx of everybody's? Wondering if we just need to.
I have, but I have not been able to view it during our presentation, so I can go back to that and just plan to send it out to everybody.
Thank you, ma'am.
All right. The next question had to do with the 20 megabytes limit. I will go ahead and explain that. So our emails have a 20 megabyte limit. It's not per document. It's for your entire package, your entire email. Cannot be any larger than 20 megabytes. That's when we ask that you send Sue Maxwell for new applications a request, and she will send you a DoD safe link that you can upload your documents. And we want to get separated documents. So your consultation will be a document, your project plans will be another document, your application will be another document, instead of the large PDF with 20 or 30 different items in it. The next one, you want me to continue reading, Lisa?
Yes, please.
Is there a preference for the ENG 4345 over the 6082? Lucy, you want to
Okay.
answer that?
Yeah, I was gonna say the reason that we have a specific form for nationwide permits is because on that form, you can actually put which nationwide permit rule that you're applying for. So the 6082 form is going to be usually used by agents or applicants that already know which nationwide permit rule they want to apply for.
Next question, just to make sure, PJD forms have to be provided for any approval, including no permit requires or nationwide permits, presuming no approved JD.
Lucy, do you want to take that one?
Sorry, I want to reread it. Where is that?
It's from Melanie Calvo.
Okay, just to make sure PJD forms have to be for, so no, you do not need, approved JDs or PJDs for any permit unless you want, a verification of the extent of resources on site. So AJDs are going, a lot of the time applicants will use jurisdictional determinations as a way to get out of mitigation. So let's say that there are a bunch of resources on site that have been deemed non-jurisdictional and the applicant doesn't feel that they should provide mitigation for all of these resources that they don't feel are jurisdictional. So they would want to get an approved jurisdictional determination to go ahead and verify that. And we would go out on site and verify the extent of those resources and verify whether they are jurisdictional to the core or not. For example, I have a project right now where there was a bunch of infield areas with a bunch of wetlands on these on-ramps. Initially, we couldn't find past permit history to deem these as non-jurisdictional features that convey stormwater. And they didn't want to offer mitigation for all of this. So we went and we were initially going to go and plan a site visit for it, but we found past permit history that labeled them as stormwater conveyance features. So it's a tool used to, determine the extent of resources and the Corps' jurisdiction over them. I get a lot of PJDs with nationwide permits and general permits a lot of the time because it's just an easy stamp of what's on site, And then for NPRs, sometimes you're going to want to have a jurisdictional determination because that's what the NPR is basically saying this work isn't within the regulatory scope of the Corps. Does that make sense? Is that helpful?
Yes, and Lucy, just to clarify, any activity that requires a Section 404 permit will require a PJD or an approved jurisdictional determination,
Yes.
either or.
But not the nationwide permit.
So that includes nationwide. So if you're nationwide, it's a 404 activity.
Mm-hmm.
You will need a PJD or an approved jurisdictional determination. PJDs are easier and they are much faster to get.
Yes, yes. AJDs take a little bit longer because we need to get that approval from the EPA and the jurisdictional determination team.
As well as Corps headquarters, they also review it. So it is more of a lengthy process, but you do have a stamped approved JD that is good for 5 years. So in planning, that does become beneficial for some developers. I know that FDOT has a lot of their projects pre-planned for many, many years, some decades.
All right, the next question asks for us to post our emails again. Our email addresses are on that second slide, and it will be on the FDOT website. and on the PDF that we are sending out. What else? Lisa, your email, I don't know if you want to put that in the chat. I don't think your email
did.
address is on the, all right.
I'll put it in there.
I can answer the one about the request for, I'll do the JDs. It says, can you clarify on the request for JD form, section A, where it asks for the acreage? Is this the acreage of the overall project or acreage of the wetlands and waters for which we are requesting the JD? Lisa, would you mind going back to the slide where it shows the two different JD forms? Just better illustrates it.
Tell me when you can see it.
I can
We
see
can.
the presentation, but not the right slide yet.
Okay. Do you want this one?
No, that one. Yeah, that one. Perfect.
Okay.
Oh, there we go. So the form on the left is going to be for all JD requests. I don't believe you put any acreages or any numbers on here. It's just kind of going to be information. It's going to be, a little bit about you, a little bit about the site, what type of jurisdictional determination you want, and then the type of work that you're doing. And although the links at the end do go to our website that have all of these forms on it, there actually might even be one specific for the JD forms. And then the PJD form on the right, this one is just for preliminary jurisdictional determinations. And that table you see at the bottom there, you're going to want to include the acreages of resources within the entire review area, not just your impacts. All there, because we're verifying, like the approximate boundaries of those resources on your site. So we're just verifying that. We're not being, verifying exact wetland lines. That is for the AJD.
Let me see. If a new species is listed while project is ongoing, do we need to request a consultation or just submit determination key? Lucy?
So there wouldn't be a key usually for a proposed listed species. But if your project would just absolutely have, no effect on a proposed listed species, that's one thing. But I would always recommend having some sort of conference or consultation with the respective service regarding a proposed listed species if you can. And, state versus federal funding, we can figure that out. So, I went a little bit over it on that ESA consultation slide. But we do, let me see. So, is there anything you want to add, Veronica?
Yeah, I was just going to suggest Martha to look at those special conditions that Lucy had in her slide, because we received guidance that we have to put those conditions in projects where we think the tricolor bat is within the range.
Mm-hmm.
And that special condition said that you will have to stop all work, come into the Corps for a consultation, and the Corps will have to reach out to U.S. Fish and Wildlife and initiate that consultation at that time, just to remind everyone that the rest of the state of Florida may be doing the same thing on this project. So if you have the time, I will definitely suggest getting conference opinions ahead of time.
Yeah. And that would be for tricolor bat or any, proposed federally listed species or proposed critical habitat. Then that's why I included that IPAC website, because it's a live ESA list where, species and their ranges or critical habitat, that's always changing. So that's why it's good to have an up-to-date website on it. There was I was just looking, there's a listed mussel species that's proposed to be, federally listed up in the panhandle over there. And not everyone looks at all of them, they just go ahead, do the mussel slopes key and are done with it. So it's always beneficial to look at proposed listed species as well, because otherwise you might have to come back in and conference for it if you start construction.
So the next question is from Daniel. Daniel, did we answer your questions about PJDs and approved JDs and when they need to be submitted? Or is there anything else that you need to
That
address?
totally completely answered my question. I
Perfect.
didn't see someone had asked about it earlier.
Perfect.
Section 404.
Veronica,
Yes.
before we move on, I would want to add something else to the question about the keys.
Go for it.
So if your project is ongoing and you do need to stop and request consultation, if there is a determination key for that project at that time, you could submit that to us. And if it has a programmatic concurrence and we agree, then we could use that as the consultation. I think that might have been part of that question as well.
All right. Thanks, Heather. Can the map, let me see. Can the maps needed be included in the project narrative or should they be separated out? Heather, you want to grab that?
Sure, the maps can be included in the NRE document or other documentation. When we're talking about separating out documents, typically what we need is the application forms, separate the NRE, separate the CRAS, the SHPO concurrence, the consultation documents. Those things need to be separated, but if you have maps that are within those documents, they could stay in the documents.
Thank you. Next question on the ENG form 4345, question 25. List the adjoining property owners whose property adjoining the water body. This excludes roadway ditches, whether considered waters or non-waters. Who wants to grab that one? Lisa, you want to grab it? Oh, you're muted, Lisa.
Got it. So regarding adjoining property owners, as a rule of thumb, we normally will ask for any neighbors that are in at least 300 feet of the said project. With DOT, obviously, you're miles and miles going, so all those abutting or adjacent businesses, residences, all of those would need to be included. So whether it's, and you asked specifically about roadside ditches, whether considered WOTUS, or this excludes ditches, whether considered WOTUS or non-WOTUS. Kristen, did I answer your question on that one?
I think so. My question is that it specifically says whose property adjoins the water body. And so I took that to mean that we only need to include the addresses for people who literally are adjacent to the wetlands and waters of the US. And in the past, I know that we had been told not to worry about roadside ditches. So that was my question, but it sounds like you're saying we just have to include anyone within 300 feet of the project limits, whether there's a wetland or a water there or not.
That is a rule of thumb that we go by. So if because your project is a singular project, right? You're doing a certain segment of the project. Someone that might not be located physically right next to where the impact is taking, but they're still going to be visible. They're going to see the project ongoing. And a lot of times when we notify some of those neighbors where the work isn't necessarily taking place in their front yard, but they see it going on, and if they have that knowledge of what the project is and what's going on, it really does assist us with responses to the public that will call and check in on what's happening.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, the next question is from Greg. Is there any discussion internally about the Corps distributing their lists or maps on CSNF canals and their limits that requires Section 408 review. I'll go ahead and answer that first part. Greg, one of your references in the very last slide, I believe it has the 408 surveys, and you can go in there and download a lot of the, at least the channels footprints. The second part, most major WMD canals are CSNF, but not all, and those that are, let me see, I'm trying to read what else. Did I answer your question?
Yes and no. I mean, so the website you all linked, I mean, that shows you the extent of federal channels, you know, the intracoastal, major rivers, etc. But there's no way for us to determine. I mean, I've been doing this long enough, so I know enough to be dangerous for the CNSF canals in South Florida, maybe some, you know, handful in the Tampa area, but you know, some of them are CNSF, most of them are, most of the major ones, some aren't, and then some that are, not all, their entire extent is. So for us, it's, you know, it's not always black and white. What is a Section 10 canal? So if I'm, you know, if I'm going to bore, directionally drill under a canal, it's a 404 water, I don't need a permit from the Corps. But maybe just downstream, it turns into a Section 10 water because it becomes CNSF, and then I'm gonna need a permit from the Corps if I bore under those limits. So I don't know where that is, and it would I always thought it would be helpful if, you know, I've seen like an old school map from the 50s, I think, of CNSF, but you know, it's nothing definitive
And I have
and
seen the
not
same
official.
map.
Yeah.
What I would suggest to you is, and I'll sign Lucy, Heather, and myself for that. If you have a project that you just need to know if you need a 408, you can always send us a KMC or a lat long using decimal degrees, and we can put that in our database and fairly quickly give you an answer of whether or not you're going to need a 408. Even if you don't have an application, we are absolutely willing to do that. We understand.
Okay. But so that would be a no, though? There is no.
I was gonna say, is there a way, you know, on our viewer, Veronica, they have access to that, right?
No, the
No.
NRV is an internal
Just us?
database. Yes.
Yeah, I didn't
Yes.
know. Okay, yeah, I didn't know if there was.
So
We will do the
public
research, but that
access
is
site
an
for it.
engineering tool.
I was going to
So
say, we can reach out to our 408 team and check to see if they've got something like that we can share with the public, and then we can circle back to you, Greg, on that one.
Okay.
Right, next one, for a nationwide permit, for a linear project, the impacts may be to one small area on a long corridor. Do the PJD forms have to include all wetlands and waters on the corridor, even if clearly not impacted?
Yes.
Yes, you can give approximate acreages. You don't need to accurately map, you know, a 7-mile long canal and give me an exact acreage. You can look at that canal, you know, give a good estimate of the acreage of that resource. And I know a lot of the time, you know, with the modifications to the stormwater system, you know, already kind of going on with the state permit, a lot of the time those numbers will already be kind of on hand. Not all the time, but sometimes, you know, they already kind of have an estimate of about how big, you know, a canal is.
Yeah, because
Yeah, what I'm referencing though is when you can have multiple small wetlands, not like a continual canal. You could have multiple dotting of small wetlands all in the right of way, but significantly away from your areas of impact. So to do the PJD, you have to identify all of them, you have to show them, you have to give their acreages. And that can be a lot of work if you're just impacting 0.01 acres at the very end to one little ditch. if it has to be done, it has to be done. I just want to make sure that if we're asking for it to be done, it needs to be done.
I mean, I would just
Absolutely.
include, in your
Yeah.
right of way and like general area. I wouldn't say something significantly far away from your project area should be included. But sorry, Lisa, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say that absolutely we do need to document that because it is in our review area of the project overall, even though say the impact is only on the east end, not the west end. But the PJD needs to reflect all of those presumed waters of the US in that project review area. So that's not just the impact area, it's the entire review area. So, although I know it can be tedious, as Lucy alluded to, they don't have to be, down to the hundredth. As far as measurement, these are estimates. But yes, those do need to be shown on the PJD.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just wanted to make sure. Thank
Yes,
you.
ma'am. You're welcome.
Next question. Let me see, make sure I don't skip anyone. Extensive. All right, here. For the wetland determination data forms, is there a clear definition or guidance to determine if vegetation, soil hydrology are significantly disturbed? There is some information in the manual, aren't in the supplement.
Yes.
Are you trying to get additional information to what's in there?
I think he wants the actual definition because you look in there and we had this discussion out in the field the other day about between significantly disturbed and then we talked about problematic. So those definitions are defined in the 87 manual and in the Gulf Coast Atlantic supplement. And I will also include those two documents when I send some of these other documents to for her to be able to post on the website. But I put my email in the chat. So if there's anything that we've discussed regarding a document that you didn't receive or can't get your hands on, feel free to reach out to me and I will find a version of it for you, an electronic version.
Does that answer your question, Tom?
Thank you.
All right. If we're using a PJD, not an approved JD, the assumption becomes all waters / aquatic resources are waters of the US, correct?
Yes.
I think there's a second part to that. Although some may require mitigation like stormwater conveyance, ditches. However, you want to go ahead and clarify that, Lisa?
Yes, when we're looking at it, we are assuming that all, and you as the applicant have assumed that, hey, it's all jurisdictional. We're just going to say everything's jurisdictional. If you have cleared conveyances, ditches that have been stormwater and have a permit for that, then that can be identified in your application as well. If we're going to start calling out stormwater ditches, we're looking, we would get more to an approved JD if we want that formal call. You're absolutely correct that ditches that are acting as stormwater conveyances or that have been permitted as such, we would not mitigate for. And in most cases for DOT, you're replacing those ditches in another location anyway. So it's basically, an in-kind replacement. So did that answer your question, Melanie?
It does. I just wanted to clarify that we can justify why mitigation may not be needed, but in our application, if we're doing a PJD, using terminology like this is not a jurisdictional WOTUS is not something we should be doing, because if we're using a PJD, the assumption is everything there is jurisdictional, right?
That is correct.
Okay, thanks.
Next question, how are the processors looking at riprap embankments with mangroves that fall above mean high water line outside section 10 purview that do not have soils under section 404 high tide lines or mean high water lines? So these are wetlands above section 10 and above section 404. Am I understanding?
Is it like just a propagule somewhere?
I guess I'm just kind of curious because we do have areas where for FDOT with roadway embankment that is riprap stabilized. And sometimes we do see that those embankments get recruited with the mangroves, right? So I just want to make sure I understand. So will you guys regulate, even though it's an armored embankment, you'll still regulate mangrove impacts under 404 for anything that's between the mean high and the high tide line, even though there's not soils?
Essential fish habitat, right? Mangroves?
So I'm just trying to get a clear
Because wouldn't it
picture.
have to have all three indicators for the core? It would have to have the hydrology, the soils, and the plants.
For wetlands, yes, for it to fall under 404.
Correct. So if we have embankment and it's armored and there are no soils, but there's mangroves, how do the processors look at that?
So, and when you say armored, do you mean with riprap or we got a seawall in there?
Both. It could be either.
So,
Just no soils. There's no soils because there's some kind of fill component.
Go ahead, Veronica.
No, I was just gonna say that if it's because there is fill, and then we'll probably have to look at the wetland delineation sheets and look at those problematic sites.
I was
and
going to
look
say,
a
like,
little
for
bit of that
instance, in the
guidance.
Keys, for, you know, for DOT District 6, they have Monroe County, and a lot of those are fill, you know, fill
Before we would
areas.
check off the disturbed on the data form.
Disturbed, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, that one seems to be a little bit project specific, Amanda. We can probably do the research and get back with you on that one.
So yeah, because anything above mean high water, but if it's below the high tide line, that's where we would capture that as 404. But I just want to make sure I'm answering your question correctly. So we'll look into that.
And
Yeah, we
also
could always follow
remember,
up separate on that. It's been a point of contention on a few project-specific coordination items, so
and
just wanna make
also
sure I'm
remember
following how you
that
guys are looking at it.
even if the project does not need a core permit, you still have the responsibility to coordinate with the other agencies, Fish and Wildlife and National Marine Fisheries, and they may have something to say if you're impacting those mangroves. But we do have to check and get you an answer.
I was going to say that a good way to address that situation in particular would probably be an AJD so that we could really, you know, determine, you know, site conditions, the extent of those that resource, and, you know, what jurisdiction, regulatory jurisdiction, if any, it would fall underneath. So.
Right, next question is from Melanie. Do you utilize the same methods as USACE to calculate indirect impacts, i.e. 25 buffer adjacent to impacted wetlands? Heather, you want to grab that?
No, if you read the next thing, she said she meant to talk about the Water Management District and DEP using that 25-foot buffer.
All right. Yep. Heather, you want to grab that? I know Heather is super familiar with secondary impacts and those buffers or indirect impacts.
This is one of my favorite questions. So for those of you who don't know, I used to work at DEP, and one of the things that when I was working there would be talked about is that 25-foot buffer is really in the state rule that's supposed to be a 25-foot upland buffer from the wetland. So if your project comes, has more than 25 feet or an average of 25 feet, but no less than 15 feet of uplands between the project and the wetlands, then there would be no secondary impacts calculated. And that is sometimes misinterpreted to mean 25 feet into the wetlands. So the way the Corps looks at that is that sometimes a 25-foot buffer is appropriate. For instance, it's very project specific, so it really depends on the quality of your resource and the area that the project is in. But a good example would be if you're widening a roadway that already has impacts, the 25 feet might be something that we would consider appropriate. However, if it was a new alignment or a really important resource, or there was a known species there that had a much larger habitat area, then a larger buffer would be more appropriate. So no, the Corps does not use 25 feet as a limit, but in some cases that may be considered appropriate.
Yeah, and
would anyone like to add on to that?
Can I just clarify that I understand that the rule is saying that it should be an upland buffer, but functionally what it's become for linear projects for DOT is we can very rarely maintain any kind of 25-foot upland buffer because we're in a roadway right away, and if we're hitting the wetland, there's very rarely a buffer. So in order to mitigate that secondary impact, what has become practice is we extend a 25-foot buffer further into the wetland and mitigate for that too at a lower rate. But what I'm hearing you say is that the Corps is not looking at it like that at all. So when we're doing calculating secondary impacts on a linear project, I guess it's just a case-by-case basis. Is that what you're saying?
That
Right,
is,
it is a
yes.
case-by-case basis. And if you believe that the 25 feet is appropriate, you can explain that in your documentation that you give to us, and we can review it and determine if we agree.
Right.
We got one last question, Veronica.
All right. On the IRS website, it requires you to list each individual named wetland and non-wetland water that is being impacted. On a large linear project, these can sometimes be dozens of individual features, which will be very tedious to data entry on the website. I'll go ahead and answer this first part. So your reviewers, Heather, Lucy, and myself, do this on a daily basis. We have to go into our internal database and enter all of those wetlands that are within your project area, wetlands and non-water wetlands for every project. So yes, I understand it's tedious, but this website is meant to mimic the PJD forms and the application forms, and that's why that is required. And in the background, what it's doing is when you're entering that information, is transferring that directly to our databases.
All right, I think that.
Question?
Greg?
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Good
Thank
deal.
you.
All right. Well, we seem to be at the end of the questions in the chat, and we are a couple minutes over on our time. Wanted to, first of all, thank everybody for attending. We really appreciate this opportunity to be able to present to you on complete application submittals. Again, the purpose for this was to be able to receive more complete application, therefore reducing any kind of request for additional information and that time period of response. So that way we can go ahead and move into processing the application to a permit. So we just wanted to, again, like I said, thank everyone. I will be giving the recording along with a couple of those documents that were referred to in the presentation. I will be sending those over to Jonathan, Adrian, and Tu at DOT, and they will be posting those. For those of you that requested the PDF of the slides today, I will get that taken care of and have those to you hopefully by the end of tomorrow, close of business. So with that, I want to say thank you again. I hope everybody learned something today. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself, Veronica, Heather, or Lucy. And with that, Thank you so much. Y'all have a wonderful day. Bye.
Bye.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.